As 1941 was well underway, the Second Weltkrieg and its ravaging nature ever so escalated to new fronts over Europe. The naval invasion at the British coast by the Americans were an initial success, but British resistance was fierce. Though help was underway, the Brits had cut off some of the taken harbors, meaning that the US soldiers would soon be left to their doom. Blood was drawn everywhere, and though the opposition did have more manpower compared to the syndicalists, they did not seem to puncture any of their main defenses. By the end of February, all of the US troops in Britain were killed or surrendered, with 20,000 Canadians mere days away from arriving. At the same time, Commune reinforcements had arrived at the border with Portugal and started increasing the pressure put on the Entente troops. With the British harbors back in the Union hands, the Canadian troops were forced to head to nearby friendly Portugal. They would help reinforce the front line that could not cope with the increased enemy resistance. Then, on the first day of March, the Russian Republic declared war on the Polish Socialist Republic, meaning that now Russia was at war with the Internationale as well. This was great news for the Entente and Austria. Surely, with Russia fighting the same enemy, there was no way they could lose. The Internationale were now facing a force that had 3 times their manpower. Though France and Russia were fighting side by side during the battles against Germany, now they were on opposite sides once more. Countries that were formerly in the Reichspakt and still had a great hatred towards the Internationale sided with Russia, even though it pained them to side by one of the countries who were responsible for the fall of the Kaiser's empire. The Russian government made it clear to Canada and the Entente that it had no intentions to intervene with their battles in any way, and thus a non-aggression pact was established. Russia was still battling with Japan though, and could thus not send its entire army towards Central Europe. Nations like the Turkish Commune, formerly known as the Ottoman Empire, acted as a doorway to flank and attack the Internationale from opportune angles. Russia's help came as a godsend, as the troops in Portugal were losing ground rapidly, due to an overwhelming amount of reinforcements coming down on them hard. Invasions everywhere were halted, and it became clear that the Internationale was a force to be reckoned with. But Bulgaria pulled off a dominating display as they invaded near Belgium and spearheaded through French countryside. Romania was battling with the Italians on Sicily to get hold of the island and use that as a base of operations to direct an assault on all of Italy from the south. Russia started to eat away at France, but in the 3 weeks that they were now involved in the war, not much had changed. Near La Rochelle, another naval invasion was performed, and yet again, only by a few thousand men, meaning it would not take long before they would be overrun and taken aback. In the final week of March, the incredible news went out that Paris had fallen. Reports from the city confirmed that the Communist capital had been captured by advancing Bulgarian troops after furious fighting across its large avenues in the Seine. Communist forces put up stiff resistance, hoping to delay Bulgarian forces as long as possible, but were eventually beaten back. As shocked Parisians looked on, the Bulgarian army paraded towards the Eiffel Tower. This festive atmosphere eventually devolved into vicious urban combat, however, with Communist resistance in the dead of night and Bulgarian force easily plowing through inefficient barricades in the large Parisian avenues. With the capital fallen into enemy hands, the rest of the Internationale received a heavy blow in morale. 3 days later, it became public that the Flemish Communal Republic had fallen, with experts believing the Wallonian Communal Republic would soon be next, and within a week, that indeed fell too. This was a huge victory for the opposition of syndicalism, but at the same time, they were gaining huge victories at the Portuguese front, so much so that they could spare reinforcements from there to strengthen fronts elsewhere. soldiers from the Union of Britain, Italy, and France all helped to secure the Portuguese lands taken from the invaders. It did not take long before France launched a huge offensive on the Bulgarians to punish them for making such a bold move. Then news arrived that trouble was stirring in Central America, where syndicalist nations conflicted directly with the West Indies. Many believe these were set in motion behind the scenes by the French and British. If things would escalate in a war with Central America, Canada would stand beside its ally, the West Indies. With the Second Weltkrieg in full effect, King Edward approved the homecoming plan made years earlier for the inevitable battle with Britain. This would mostly secure Canada's shoreline, something that seemed like a good idea with the resistance they found in Portugal. The offensive launched by the French seemed to work, and it gave them hope that they were now able to fight at 3 different fronts at the same time. By the end of April, Central America had officially been taken in by the Internacional, throwing it into combat as well. Canada promised to come to the West Indies' aid, but also knew that Central America, as it stood, formed no threat to anyone with naval blockades all around. And all the while Portugal was still slowly being pushed back, other countries looked for new opportunities to attack. Romania continued to chip away at Italy's defenses by probing naval invasions in multiple areas. Austria still held strong with Russia to the east not performing to its expected strength. If even the addition of Russia would not make a difference in the pacing now dominated by the Internationale, the Entente could be in a lot of trouble. The Internationale simply had so many troops everywhere. Time and time again, the naval invasions by the Romanians were put to rest, though it did take a toll on the morale and resources of the Italians. Even the Greeks meddled with them by using their opportune position as an advantage to easily issue naval invasions on the enemy. Russia now was heading deeper into Polish territory, and Finland did the same to France. But Russia did have trouble keeping a clean front line across the board. The South African Federation saw an opportunity once more to attack Scotland from afar, as most reinforcements sent there last time had all moved to other places across Britain or Central Europe. Russia, that was having trouble spearheading through Poland, used the Finnish conquered territory as a new route to cut off some of the International forces fighting in the east. Though initially the South Africans were successful in claiming some territory in Scotland once again, it did not take long before dedicated reinforcing troops ended their attempt in blood. The Romanians and Austrians were able to claim almost 90% of Sicily, but were not able to drive the enemy off the island completely. This was mostly due to several divisions driven towards this one choke point, making it impossible to combat effectively due to its narrow-minded front line. However, the Austrians were having a bit more success up north in Italy, thanks to one of the many naval invasion attempts by the Romanians. Despite the opposition eating away at the Internationale from different angles, it were their enemies who suffered heavier losses and death tolls. Reports arrived directly from the battlefield in Portugal about the terrible circumstances the soldiers were fighting in. They were facing hundreds of thousands of enemy infantry and were low on supplies, whereas the syndicalists were rearmed and resupplied every day. Russia was not making much progress either. The Internationale could afford focusing on Portugal now and then finally send those troops over to Eastern Europe to deal with the meddling Russians. By having their troops pushed back into Portugal, the front line widened again, and the Entente simply did not have enough troops here to secure it at all places. And Austria still could not take a complete hold of the south of Italy, as Greek and Romanian invasions were once again halted. The Austrians still held like they always did, and hoped for an opening from either the western or eastern front for them to make a difference. Bulgaria this time tried to invade Italy, maybe with the hopes of attacking and flanking the Italian forces held up at the choke point to the south. The Entente by now had lost almost 50% of their gained territory during the war in Portugal. Overall, it was a huge mess and a signal to all those heeding a warning that this war was far from over.